No, I needed to. Okay. I am here. Yeah. And it's on. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So, as I sent out in the message, we were supposed to start a new series today. We did the 2 weeks on relationships. We were supposed to start the Kabbalah of animals. But I postponed it till next week. We'll start that next week, please God. Because I just felt that after Sunday, I'm sure I'm not the only one, it was a little bit unsettling and people were left a bit shaken, I think, on many different levels. Just by one of them including the just open anti-Semitism on display at our doorstep. So I decided it was important to spend some time and processing, understanding what the Jewish perspective is, what our response needs to be. When I say our response, I don't mean the whole community. I'm just talking about each one within ourselves, to each other, and how we strengthen ourselves and each other, and so on. So I'm going to share some thoughts openly, honestly, from the heart, hopefully. Those of you who don't come every week, it's a little bit different today. And maybe I should just sort of say at the outset that some of the things I might say will come across strong maybe, but I promise you they're not out of any judgment, but only from love and urgency. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important just to, for a moment, just to reflect and understand that the strategy here is not escape. What I mean to say is we shouldn't sugarcoat it. It was bad, and sometimes it's also important to acknowledge what we're feeling and why we're feeling that way and why we're feeling sort of unsettled. Because what happened, I mean, what's been happening all last 2 years, but what happened particularly last Sunday here in Sydney is confronting. And it's insane. I mean, when I say it's insane, because it was enforcing narratives that are completely stupid and insane, threatening. Overwhelming. I mean, someone said that there were more people on the Harbour Bridge last Sunday than there are Jews in Australia, which I think is true, or at least in Sydney. And I know I never talk politics, but I might get a little bit political today because I'm angry, as everyone is. We shouldn't be angry, but we are. And what I found very disturbing and anger-inducing was the words of politicians, and not Islamists, not Arabs, not people who are terrorist sort of sympathizers, but politicians, including our Prime Minister, and people like him, and mayors, and Clover Moore, and all that, who talk about a peaceful protest. I don't know how you translate the word peaceful, but that's not a peaceful protest, right? Screaming death to the IDF is not a peaceful protest. It's not my definition of peaceful anyway. I'm sure it's not yours. Pictures of Khomeini, swastikas and Israeli flags, river to the sea. Openly supporting terrorism, that's not a peaceful protest. I know I also believe in free speech. I think free speech is a good thing, but that's not free speech. That's supporting of terrorism, it's incitement, and it's bad. And I think what it does for many of us, the point of today was not to get you more upset, but I think it's important just to acknowledge what we're feeling and talk it out, because what it does is it reminds us, or it enforces really the global isolation of Israel and the Jewish people. Interestingly, we just came last week from Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. This happened on Tisha B'Av, actually. where in synagogues, in shuls, we read a Megillah, we read a section of Tanakh called Eicha, which begins with the words Eicha Yashva Badad. How is it, alas, that the Jewish people in Jerusalem are sitting alone? So that was a very, and it's particularly actually not so much as we'll talk about soon. It perhaps is worse, although it's about Israel, but it's not really. It's about the Jewish people, not only about Israel. And in fact, you feel it a bit worse outside of Israel, as I'll soon explain. And one of the things I was thinking about, it came from a question someone asked because, they were very, very upset, and it was the same week that, those very, very tragic pictures of the hostages that they're still holding on to, which, by the way, no one said a word about on Sunday, even though they were supposedly marching for humanity, came out, and it was just very upsetting. And someone says, "It looks like we're not winning," which I don't think is true, by the way, but it does look like that. And I was reminded of an idea. There was a great Hasidic Rebbe called the Ruzhiner Rebbe. And the Ruzhiner Rebbe said the following, and I just need to give you a bit of background. There's a story in Tanakh about Elijah the prophet, which took place during the First Temple, biblical times, Tanakh. And at that time, there was a particular problem in the land of Israel where pagan worship was very rampant. And a lot of people, even Jews, were serving an idol called the Baal. That's what it was the name of the idol. And Elijah the prophet one day went on Mount Carmel, Hara Carmel, and he challenged the leaders of Baal. And he said, let's build 2 altars. You build an altar for Baal, and I'll build an altar for God. And then we'll sacrifice, and you go first, and we'll see. You won't put fire there, but you'll pray to your God and see if a fire will come out and consume your sacrifice. So the Baal supporters went first, screamed and shouted and prayed, and nothing happened. And then it was Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet's turn second, and he built an altar for God. He even put water on it, and a little moat around it, put water scattered around. And then he turned to God, and it says in the pasuk, in the verse, Vayihi ba'alota mincha, it was afternoon time, because we learn traditionally that the prayer of mincha, especially in the afternoon, has special power. And he turned to God and he says, Aneni, answer me. And a fire came out and consumed Elijah the prophet's sacrifice. To which the crowd responded and said, it didn't last that long, unfortunately, because it continued on afterwards as well. But at that moment, they came round and they said, Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem hu Elokim, God is the Lord, God is true. And the Ruzhiner Rebbe said, listen to this, it's actually quite, later I'll reframe it a little bit, actually it's quite a beautiful, optimistic message, but on the surface it's a terrible message. And the Ruzhiner Rebbe said that before Mashiach comes, in the future, he said in the future, I mean now, before Mashiach comes, the fire will come down on the wrong side. That's what's going to happen, he said. And that will be the test of the Jewish people. The test of faith will be that it'll look like the fire is coming down on the wrong side. And it'll be up to us to understand that although the fire is coming down on the wrong side, the fire is coming down for the majority maybe, for the entire world, for the entire countries, God is still God. Hashem hu Elokim. But that's part of the test and the darkness that will happen before the Mashiach comes, he says, before the final redemption, before the final era of peace and spiritual service and divine consciousness will happen, the fire will come down on the wrong side. So that's part of what's happening. The fire is coming down on the wrong side. In a way, that's what it seems like. But I said before that it's particularly concerning outside of Israel, and I took that point, an interesting point, from a now quite famous speech, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, by Dan Seno. So Dan Seno is an American columnist, for those that don't know, and a political advisor, a podcaster, quite a famous guy. Not very religious Jew, but very proudly Jewish. He wrote a book called The Genius of Israel, and he lately gave a speech which has now become quite viral, called The State of Jewry, the State of Jewry Address. And there he says, and he was talking about the situation in America and college campuses and so on, and he says that it's like there's a paradoxical truth, and he says that despite the immense pain of tragedy, I'm paraphrasing a bit, and the internal conflicts that happened in Israel, but actually Israel has emerged stronger than ever. That's the truth. Israel is very, very strong at the moment. And sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but it is. They've almost decimated Hezbollah. They've basically destroyed the capabilities of Iran. Hamas has suffered an amazing blow, despite the fact that they still hold their hostages. And in a very weird way, although the narrative around the world is very isolating of Israel, but the truth is that internationally countries actually are more moving towards Israel. It's quite Arab countries actually, quite amazingly so. He says Israel's okay, and will be okay. What he was more concerned about is the Jewish people outside of Israel are fighting a different war, a war of narratives, a war of information, right? And we know that anti-Semitism is rapidly growing, and college campuses have become hotbeds for racism and misinformation. Social media is out of control. News outlets are out of control. So he says we're clearly not winning the information war. That is clear, right? Now, what makes it more difficult, and then I think actually gives us the message of how to respond, is this. What makes it more difficult is, I was reminded about a number of years ago, I was in New York, and there was an older chassid, an older guy who was running what we call, he was running like a fabring one night. There were a bunch of people there, and they were sitting, and they were talking, and he was talking. He's a very clever guy. And his style is he likes to engage people. He likes when people argue with him, so he can explain things and ask questions and so on. And then someone said something outrageous, like just stupid, in the form of a question. So he thinks to himself, and he pauses, and he says, "I'm really sorry, but I actually can't even disagree with you, because I don't like it. You can disagree with something that's sort of within the same context of the discussion. But like when someone says something that's just completely crazy, like he says, I don't even know how to disagree with you." And really that's what's happening now, right? Like even what happened last Sunday, it just absolutely makes no sense. It's amazing how narratives can be created. I mean, we really literally are seeing modern blood libels, lies, media manipulation, all that kind of stuff. And it just emphasizes the uselessness, the futility of even trying to debate, even trying to argue. Because there's nothing to argue with. It's like so dumb and so stupid and just so nonsensical, right? So the question is, what do we do? How do we respond? So what is clear is like this. We have to change our strategy completely. Not change, we have to reconnect. Right? Now that I've made it even worse. I mean, that wasn't my intention. Again, my intention was, it's important not to sugarcoat it, to know what it is. But at the same time, to understand that we actually, because it's so insane, we actually need a completely different strategy and different perspective. And I'm going to use Dan Seno a couple of times here because I think it's more powerful when a person is not a rabbi says it, right? After all, we get paid to say things like this, right? But and not only him, I'm going to talk about a few people because it's something that people are coming to the realization of. It's not just, it's something that we really need to look at. And to use these words, he used a very beautiful metaphor, and he says, what we're trying to do is we're bailing out a tsunami with buckets. And he said, instead, we need to build an ark. What does he mean? In other words, we need to do something different, something completely different. PR campaigns, hasbara, debating, advocacy, they're all important, but they're not working. And they still need to happen. Because, there are people who sit in the middle and sit on the fence and need to hear it, and, the Douglas Murrays of the world and all these people, they're amazing, amazing people, but that's not what's doing it. That's not what's winning. This is not winning. Important, but not our main goal, right? What we need as Jewish people is we need something deeper, and we need something that's much more enduring. So we have to go back a little bit in history, and we have to understand that what we need to do is we need to, instead of always moving outward and trying to attack or explain or debate the outside, we actually really, with urgency, have to turn inward. Right? We have to turn, first of all, into our heritage. We have to turn into our history to understand this. And then we have to turn into our soul to understand what we need to do. So first of all, it's important to understand that anti-Semitism goes up and down. Anti-Semitism is not new, unfortunately. It's actually part of the fabric of the Jewish journey, as we'll see in a minute, right? And more sometimes, Rabbi Gs has a whole thing on this where he says it's religious hatred or racial hatred, political hatred, now it's anti-Israel hatred. It's all the same hatred, right? And I want to go back to where it all began. I think it's important to understand this, to understand the strategy. So we are called, I've mentioned this before, we are called B'nai Yisrael, right? The reason we're called B'nai Yisrael is because we have 3 patriarchs and 4 matriarchs, and the 3rd patriarch was Yaakov, right? Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And Yaakov had 2 names. One of his names was Yaakov, and one of his names was Yisrael. And we come from Yaakov, and his Rachel and Leah, his wives, but we are sons, children of Yaakov, and therefore his name was Israel, and therefore hence the name B'nai Yisrael. Sometimes the Torah refers to us as Bet Yaakov, sometimes B'nai Yisrael, it's the same thing. But universally we call B'nai Yisrael, Israel essentially, right? Yaakov had a brother called Esav, right? Evil, an evil brother. The whole story with the blessings and the stealing of the blessings and so on and so forth. Yaakov understands that Esav wants to destroy him and he runs away. That was what he needed to do at the time. He runs away. Rivka, his mother, sent him away to her brother Lavan, who wasn't such a good guy either, but he spent 20 years in the house of Lavan. When he finally comes back, 2 things happen. First of all, he's traveling back, and it says in the Torah that he crossed, you'll see why this is so important in a minute. He crosses a stream, gets his whole family over the stream. Then he realizes he forgot something, so he went back. He went back. Vayivater Yaakov levado, and that moment he was alone, without his family. And says the Torah, Vayavek ish imo, a man wrestled with him the entire night. Who was that man? It actually wasn't a man. It was an angel. And the Talmud tells us that every nation has an angel. Every nation has like a supervising angel. Of course, everything comes from God, and nothing else has any control, but God appoints angels to take care of the different nations. And this was the angel of Esav. Before he even got to the real Esav, this was the angel of Esav. And the angel of Esav attacks Yaakov and fights with him, wrestles with him the entire night, it says, the entire night. Tries to kill him, tries to overpower him, and can't. But the angel does manage to injure him. Injures his thigh. And Yaakov for a time afterwards limps. And we understand, of course, that is a metaphor. Not just, it happened, but it's also a symbol. Because we are taught that whatever happens to our forefathers, whatever happens to our ancestors was really a preview. Like Abraham Avinu went down to Egypt, that was actually a symbol of the Egyptian exile that we had to endure. But this episode was actually about the long night. Night is darkness. The long journey, we just had Tisha B'Av last Sunday, as I said, mourning the destruction of the temple, and after the temple was destroyed, began a long night, a Roman night. It was the Roman exile. Romans come from Esav. All right, we are now in the exile of Esav. And Esav is fighting, and Esav tries to fight with us and wrestles with us the entire night and injures us, but cannot destroy us. We'll come back to that in a minute. But then, what happens is that Yaakov sends a message to Esav. He sends messages to Esav before he gets to meet Esav, to understand where's Esav holding, the human Esav, right? The symbol of anti-Semitism, essentially. And the messengers come back, and they say to him, Esav is on the way to meet you with 400 soldiers. A big army compared to Yaakov's family that he had built in while he was away in his uncle's house Lavan, where he married Rachel and Leah and had all his children. 11 of the 12 tribes were born in Haran, not Binyamin, but besides the last one, 11 of the 12 tribes were born while he was away from Esav. So he gets he's scared. He prays to God. develops a strategy, sends presents, and later we're going to come back to what actually happens. But in other words, Esau's hatred has not gone away. That's what the Torah tells him. That's what the messengers tell Yaakov. And that's the seeds of anti-Semitism. It's not new. It's unfortunately part of the design until Mashiach comes. We say, you're all familiar with the song and the passage that we say in the Haggadah every single Pesach night, Shebachol dor vador, every single generation, Omdim oleinu l'chalatenu. They get up and they try to destroy us, but Vakadosh Baruch Hu matzileinu, God will save us, God saves us, and so on and so forth. And of course the commentaries explain that attempts to destroy us every generation is different. Sometimes it's open aggression, sometimes open anti-Semitism, persecution, sometimes it's spiritual persecution where they try to force us to lose our religious and spiritual attachment and connection. Nowadays, it's in fact in Kabbalah, there is sources fascinating enough that towards the end of the long journey, it'll actually be not so much Esau, but it'll also be Esau's uncle, Yishmael, who will become really become the problem, which is a fascinating Zohar and other sources, which is really what we're seeing now, the anti-Israel, and it's even a source, I've forgotten which one it is, that talks about that the end of the journey, the end of the long night will actually happen when Jews already have some control over Israel, and yet they'll still be threatened. It's a fascinating thing. Very, very prophetic and this is centuries ago, right? But it's around. And the question is, what do we do and what's the arc that we have to build? So why am I saying this now is because what hit me this last week is, as I said before, that it's not something you can argue with anymore. It's completely insane. Which actually has a very strong message. And this is really part of what I want to share with you today. It's so insane that it's actually sending us a very important message. And the important message is that it doesn't have a rational response. We can try, we can do, but actually that's not the response. That's just not the response to what we have to have. Because you can't fight insanity with rationality. It doesn't work. It's impossible. You're not going to win, and we're not winning. So therefore, the message of insanity is you've got to change your response or upgrade your response. And the response has to be something that transcends the rational, something spiritual, something that comes from the depth of the soul, something that comes from the depth of the neshama that is not rational. It comes from a very deep place within each one of us. It comes from a place of Jewishness. It comes from a place of spirituality. It comes from a place, but we need to know how to do that. And now's the time. It's urgent. That's our response. That's our fight back, as we'll soon develop. So, there's a few things. First of all, we need to revisit. We've talked about this before, especially this October 7th. But now maybe it's time to remind us again, but it's not the main point I want to make, but it's such an important point nevertheless. We have to visit some of our perspectives, right? Because we have to look at history. How have Jews done this always? How have we always done this? How have we responded? So, even though it's difficult and even though sometimes it seems like it's not helping, but we have to understand that through Jewish history, there are certain axioms that we've held onto that we just cannot let go of because there's no other way. We just can't abandon them now. It's not who we are. It's not part of our DNA. What are them? The first one is the hope and the faith. We have never lost hope, and we're not going to lose hope now either. Even though the fire seems like it's coming down on the wrong side, we need to reframe that. We need to understand the Ruzhiner Rebbe who said this, quite prophetically. He said it about something that's going to happen at the end of the night, which means daytime is around the corner. So we should take hope from that. It's harder because it's coming down on the wrong side. We're losing the information war. We're losing the rational war. It seems to be growing. But that should actually give us more hope, because hope is part of who we are as a Jewish people. We never ever give up hope. We never gave up hope in the most difficult times. There was a story, I don't remember exactly the details of the story, but I remember hearing a story when I was many, many years ago of a Jew that was running away from the Spanish Inquisition, and the ship capsized, he lost his family, and he got stranded on a beach. He had nothing in the whole world. And he turns to God and he says to God, you know what? You can take my community, you can take my family, you can take my wealth, you can do everything on me. But I'm telling you, God, one thing you're not going to take from me is my hope and my faith. You can't take that away from me. It's not going to happen. Because that's who we are. We never give up hope, and we never give up emunah. We just have to dig deeper sometimes to find it. Right? And part of the emunah is to remember and to remind ourselves that we are a people that do not subscribe to the routine of nature. Yes, we live in a world that is run naturally. We live in a world that we're supposed to do things naturally, of course. We're supposed to go to work to earn a living. We're supposed to eat in order not to be hungry. We're supposed to take care of our health. All that is true. But at the end of the day, our survival, our continuity, our existence is a supernatural one. Why is that so important? Because when you live in the world of nature, if you live in the world of nature, if that's your reality, that's your context, that's your experience. So of course, when you look at things rationally, it looks like there's no hope. So there is no hope, because that's what nature dictates. If you plant a field and you plant produce, and there's no water and it's not raining, and we know naturally you need water to grow bananas. If there's no water, it's not going to grow. Yeah, that's true. But we don't work like that. We don't exist in that reality. We never have. We've always existed completely irrationally. Our existence is irrational. Our existence is supernatural. Once again, I refer back to this past Sunday where we celebrated Tisha B'Av, and we know that the second temple was destroyed by a Roman general, a very evil Roman general called Titus. If you go to the Vatican today, there's a statue of him, right? A brutal, evil Roman general who became the emperor afterwards for a very short time. And a number of years after Titus took Jewish slaves from Jerusalem and brought them to Rome, including carrying, it's not clear what it was, a menorah or the menorah, whatever the case is, right? They built an arch, known today as the Arch of Titus. It's still around. They built an arch to honor him for his amazing victory of destroying Jerusalem and destroying the temple and taking the Jews out of Israel into exile. So there's a story of the Ponevezher Rav. Ponevezher Rav was a Rosh Hashiva, a Holocaust survivor, who had a yeshiva in Lithuania called in the city was called Ponevezh. All the South Africans would remember, because actually he came to South Africa a few times afterwards, and actually he collected money. They gave very generously in South Africa for his yeshiva. There's a room in the Ponevezh yeshiva today in Bnei Brak that is dedicated to the Jews of South Africa. Right. He was a very, very smart man. My parents knew him before I was born. He came to Cape Town, he even stayed in our house. A very, very great man. And he built yeshivas. He built a girls' seminary and he built a boys' yeshiva because he wanted to rebuild Torah learning after the war, and he was very determined to do that. And he went around the world. He was a master fundraiser. He was a great guy. He went all over the world, particularly in South Africa, where he knew many people from before the war, from Lithuania. And he would go around the world, but he was a busy person. Whenever he went around the world, he traveled a lot. But he never went sightseeing or looked at sites or anything like that, because he didn't have time for it. It wasn't his interest. His interest was rebuilding. But one time he was in Italy, and he visited the Roman community, which, by the way, is an ancient community. And on his way out, he asked the driver, "Do you mind if you stop by the Arch of Titus?" So the driver was a bit surprised, because he'd never ever made any request to stop at any important site. Okay, but Ponevezh Rav asked, they asked. So he says, sure, and he stops there, and the Ponevezh Rav gets out of the car, and he goes towards the Arch of Titus, and he stands in front of the arch for a few moments, and then he screams out, he says, "Titus, Titus, where are you? You try to destroy us, your whole empire doesn't exist." Except for a few Latin words that English is built on and all that kind of stuff, right? They're all gone, and we're still here. Not here, we're thriving. We are thriving, and we need to know that. Despite what's going on, we are thriving. Israel is thriving. Broken, but unbreakable. And we will thrive. We will emerge. So we need to understand that. That's our existence. That's our DNA. That's who we are. That's our emunah. We need to reconnect with it. Hope. We need to never, ever, ever give up hope. The second axiom that Jews have always lived by is to understand that even when we go through tragedy, even when we go through hardship, Hashem is with us in the hardship. We've spoken about this at length before. Imo anachi b'tzara. God does things, He allows things to happen that we don't understand, but He's always with us. He's hugging us in the trouble, in the distress. It's not, I didn't make this up. King David says this. In the most famous Psalm 23, he says, Gam ki eilech b'geit salmavet. Even when I walk in the valley of death, lo irara, I don't fear bad, because ata imadi, you are with me. And of course, the other thing we need to remember, and this is again an axiom of throughout the generation, is the power of prayer. Of course we have to pray, because praying is very, very powerful. Extra tehillim, prayer and so on. But I think today what we need to focus on is something else. That's all true and all important and all critical. Going back to Dan Seno's lecture, I didn't get the idea from him, but it's good to know that even people like him are coming around to this way of thinking. He says, so what do we need to do? How do we build this ark? He says, by immersing ourselves in Jewish pride, Jewish learning, and Jewish practice. Right? He quotes Rabbi Gs, who famously said, non-Jews respect Jews who respect their own Judaism. We have to connect to our Jewishness in a very practical and immersive way. He makes a very good point, a historic point. He says, downplaying our Judaism has never worked. Assimilation has never worked, not in Spain, not in Germany, not in the Arab countries. I mean, we don't have the time to go into in great detail, but that's a fact. It's never worked to protect us. Never worked. So what does that mean? Let's go back to the story of Yaakov. So a very interesting thing happens. Yaakov finally meets up with Esau. It's a momentous thing. The Torah describes it. What does he do? Yaakov was afraid. A little bit. For which, by the way, our rabbis tell us he was a bit punished later on for that, because he was such a great man, he should have had better bitachon. Okay? But we are afraid a little bit. We won't be punished for it because that's our level. That's fine. We're normal human beings. Yaakov prays. He develops a natural strategy, which we should always do. He divides his family into two camps, just in case one needs to escape, a whole story. And then he sends lots of presents to Esau. When Esau meets him, he's very respectful, and he addresses him very respectful. And they finally meet up. And as they meet up, they hug. And it says, Vayishakeu, and Esau kissed Yaakov. But in the Torah, you know the Torah has no vowels, right? It's just words in the Torah scroll. But sometimes, once in a while, there's something interesting, something strange. On the word Vayishakeu, there's a few dots, just dots on top of the letters, that he kissed him. And the question is, what does that mean? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous author of the Zohar, says, and Rashi brings it down in the Chumash, he says, anti-Semitism is there. You think Esau didn't all of a sudden become a Jewish lover, but he was softened at that moment. And at that moment, he kissed Yaakov. They embraced. It was a true embrace. He respected him. Why? Was it just the presence? Was it just the respect that he gave him? No. The Torah says something very interesting. One of the messages that Yaakov sent Esau on the way back, he told him the following. He said, we did it a few weeks ago, so he told him that he's strong, he's got oxen, he's got donkeys, right? We talked about this. But there's another message he gave him. Before he says that, he said, I want you to know, Im Lavan Garti. For the last 20 years, I have lived with Lavan. But the word he uses is Garti, I lived. And the sages point out a very fascinating thing. The word Garti is the same numerical value as Taryag, which is 613. Yaakov says, I want you to know who I am. I am a proud Jew. And how does that? Don't mess with me. Because I'm proud of my Jewishness. And even though the Torah wasn't given, we are taught that the sages tried to keep all the mitzvot even before they were given. Yaakov turns to Esau and he says, I just came back from 20 years of Lavan, who wasn't easy either, by the way. Lavan drove Yaakov crazy, even though he was his father-in-law. But he was a con artist and he was treated him badly and the whole thing. But Yaakov said, it's not a problem because I survived. Why? Because im Lavan Garti. I lived with Lavan, I kept the mitzvot. I kept the mitzvot. I immersed myself in Jewish practice. In 2019, There's a person called Elliot Cosgrove. He's a conservative rabbi of one of the big conservative temples in Manhattan, the Park Synagogue it's called. Now, you know, I'm not a tremendous fan of the philosophy of reform or conservative. I think, you know, I'm unashamedly orthodox and believe that the Torah was given at Sinai and it's divine, and we have a system of halakha that we have to adhere to and so on. But it was just fascinating to hear his speech. He gave it on Yom Kippur. It was recorded. Probably shouldn't have listened to it, but I did. I mean, I think it's anything halachic wrong listening to it. There was a problem recording it, but anyway. And he gave the most bizarre speech for a conservative clergyman. He spoke about Chabad and the mitzvah campaign. He started off that way anyways. And he gave a half an hour sermon. And this is way before October 7th, everything, right? And he said, why is he talking about it? He said, because nothing else has really worked, he said. It wasn't about Chabad, it was about mitzvot. He said, I'm here tonight to talk to you about mitzvot. And he said, he used his words, he says, here you go, I've said it, he said. It's been years that I've been speaking to you about lots of different things, but today I'm talking about mitzvot. He said, because we cannot leverage the Holocaust for the next generation anymore, it doesn't work. Even Israel, you see, you can't, and he was so right, and it's interesting that he came from that perspective. Israel also ultimately won't work. What I mean by that, Israel is critical to the Jewish nation. Critical. But you can't divorce Israel from Judaism. It's a big mistake people make. You cannot divorce Israel from Judaism. Israel is ours because it's a God-given land. Our connection to Israel is because it's the palace of God. Israel, connection to Israel, belief in Israel, support of Israel, and Jewish practice and Jewish immersion is one of the same. It's not even two sides of the same coin, it's one side. It's the same thing. And he says, in his words, he says, and when I talk about mitzvot, this is his words, a conservative rabbi. He says, I'm not talking about being kind. That's a very important thing. Of course, it's a mitzvah to be kind. I'm talking about actual Jewish practice because that is Jewish practice and Jewish learning. Dan Seno in his speech says the same thing. He says we need to immerse ourselves in Jewish practice and Jewish learning, and he talks about a website. I don't know what it is. He says he's on this campaign. He says thousands of people have taken upon themselves to learn the weekly parsha. And I've got to tell you, the weekly parshas, you know, some of them are easy, some of them are inspiring, some of them are much more difficult to understand. But the website now that gives some sort of, I don't know, accessible, I'm not even sure what it is, but I mean, there's plenty of places you can get the weekly parsha, but right. So they've taken upon themselves to study more, because that is the answer to anti-Semitism. That is the answer to our continuity and eternity. We are Jews, and therefore we need to respond with Jewishness. That's how we respond to this terrible thing, to this terrible disease. And we need to do it in a way where it makes a difference. Now, of course, not everyone's on a different journey. We've talked about it many times. So, of course, you don't just, suddenly start keeping all the mitzvot. No one does. No one's perfect. But everyone has to make a move. Everyone has to make a step. And I want to challenge you. I think it's so important. I think it's urgent. Because, in Hasidic philosophy, there's this concept that goes like this. This comes from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He has a very, very long essay on it. And after that, the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, also spoke a lot about this as well. About positive insanity. I said before that what's going now is not a rational thing. It's an insane thing. How do you fight insanity? With insanity. It's what he called, I'll use the terminology, I'll explain it. Foolishness, insanity in Hebrew is called shtus. Shtut in Sephardic pronunciation. To be a shoter means an insane person, right? So there's a concept of shtut. Shtut means insanity, foolishness. So there's what we call shtut, the klipa, which means the foolishness and insanity of impurity, of evil, which has to be fought and matched with shtut of kedusha, shtut of holiness. Right? What does that mean? That means often we know we should embrace something. We know we should take a step forward. in our Jewish practice, in our Jewish learning. But we have very valid excuses, rational excuses, things that make sense why we can't. I didn't grow up this way. I don't know a lot. I've never learned. Social pressure. It's not the shtetl, people say. It's different now. We live in the modern world. All this kind of stuff, right? All rational responses. But that's the problem. You can't fight insanity with rationale. So yes, what we do is we try to calm ourselves. We all do this, by the way. I'm not judging anyone. I'm talking to myself, because everyone's got to do this. It's not about people who do keep mitzvah, don't keep mitzvah. That's not what it's about. It's about everyone's response. So we all do this. I've been doing it since October the 7th. Every day after we finish the morning prayer, we say an extra chapter of Tehillim. Some people write an extra candle, all that kind of stuff. It's nice, but it's not what we're talking about. We need an insane response. We need to push ourselves. We need to do something that we consider crazy for ourselves. Maybe someone else doesn't consider crazy, but we need to do something that we consider crazy, right? We need to do something and maybe someone will call you crazy because you're doing it. But it's part of connecting to your Jewishness. I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute. But that's what it is. It means to do something significant, Jewishly significant, that will change me, will change my life, will bring up my Jewish pride, will bring up my neshama, will nurture my faith. That's what we need to do now. That's the ark we need to build. And people are catching on to this. In Israel, they've caught on to it a long time ago. The awakening of in the men's space, of putting on tefillin in the soldiers, regular people. I witnessed it myself in Israel. The tzitzit, the connection to Shabbat. Hostages started keeping Shabbat. They saw that that's the only way. The only way that there's the Omer Shem Tov, that is an amazing hostage, but he's only one of a number of them. They came out, ever since he came out, I mean, all these people down there, they grew up in a very secular society, and yet they've discovered that that's the only way to fight back, is connect to our Jewishness in a practical way. Jewishness, at the end of the day, is about mitzvot. Mitzvot, the word mitzvah in Hebrew actually means, it comes from an Aramaic word as well. It doesn't mean a commandment. It comes from an Aramaic word that means tzafta, which means to connect. Let's just bring this down to sort of a practical level, and I want to finish with two things. First thing is, and I'm going to talk a little bit quickly because we're running out of time. When the Jewish people came out of Egypt, I've mentioned this before, but I want to give a different perspective. When the Jewish people came out of Egypt, they left Egypt, and a few days later they arrived at the Red Sea, and they were completely surrounded. Right? They were overwhelmed. There was a sea that couldn't continue. At the back of them, Paro and his army was chasing them, pursuing them. They had nowhere to run. A little bit like the feeling we have nowadays. There's nowhere to run. I mean, we have where to run, thank God. But it's like that overwhelmingness of being surrounded, being attacked from all fronts. And as they came to the Red Sea, there's a famous medrash that the Jewish people divided themselves into 4 groups with 4 opinions. Some people say the miracle was only 4 opinions, but okay. What were the 4 opinions? The one group said we can't do this. Let's just jump into the sea. Give up hope, take our lives, whatever, surrender basically. The second group says, let's go back to Egypt. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but let's go back to Egypt. The third group says, let's fight a war, let's attack, let's really fight. And the fourth group says, let's pray. What can be better than praying? Pray to God. Power of prayer, we just said it before. We have to pray. And God turns to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, and says they're all wrong. Daber el b'nei Yisrael, talk to the Jewish people and tell them to keep on traveling. V'yisau, move, travel. What does this mean, this message? First of all, where were they traveling to? And what was so important about traveling? And the answer to this is, one of the perspectives is, that of course, some of these perspectives were wrong, and some of these perspectives were right, but they were still wrong. If that's your only answer. Of course, surrendering, giving up hope, that's never right. Going back to Egypt is about let's assimilate, let's integrate. Forget about it, we just won't stand out, we're not going to be a separate nation, let's just go back to Egypt, and well, that's never worked anyway, as we said before. The third one says, let's fight a war, let's attack. That's not wrong, by the way. Sometimes you have to fight. There are wars that have to happen. The current war is one that has to happen. Fighting spiritually, debating even has its place. We leave it to the experts, right? As we said before, we need those people. We need advocacy. We need fighting in physically, and we need fighting in words and information. But that's not what collectively what the Jewish people have to do. And the fourth one says, let's pray, and of course we have to pray. But God says, don't escape into prayer as if that's your answer. Of course you have to pray. The answer is move towards Har Sinai. Go towards the mountain of Sinai. Because it's at Har Sinai you're going to get two things. You're going to get the Torah, which is the Jewish wisdom, which has been, and I've mentioned this many, many times, it's been the number one constant within the Jewish people since Har Sinai. There's never been a time in Jewish history that we didn't have academies of learning, that we weren't immersed in Jewish learning. Even when you had societies that were completely illiterate, the Jewish nation wasn't, because they always studied, they always learned. Because when you learn and you internalize not just a subject, you internalize God's wisdom, you internalize His perspective on the world, your life changes. And that Torah you're going to get at Har Sinai comes with mitzvot. It comes with practices, Jewish practice. That's what Dan Seno was saying in his lecture. He says we've got to involve ourselves and immerse ourselves in Jewish practice, and he talks about some of the things he's done. So it's coming at this discussion is coming at an interesting time of the year, because in 2 weeks we start the month of Elul. You must remember the month of Elul, right? That's when I drive you all crazy. But instead of driving you crazy in Elul, I'm going to drive you crazy now. I'm going to challenge you. Take a mitzvah as a response. You're upset about last week? Take a mitzvah to do. You can choose your mitzvah. But as that conservative rabbi said, not just, I'm going to be more kinder to the guy in the street. You should do that anyways. Anyone can do that. And any human being can do that and should do that, and we should also do that. Of course we have to do that. But take something that's uniquely Jewish. If you don't keep kosher, maybe take upon yourself just to buy kosher meat. Start something. If you have a mezuzah on your door, put mezuzahs on more doors. Mezuzah is not only supposed to be in the front door, it should be on all doors. Especially mezuzah brings protection. Right? If you need help, let me know. I'll help you out. Any of this stuff, by the way. Coming up Rosh Hashanah, people sometimes go to shul, sometimes don't. You hear shofar. Some people go the first day. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. Go a second day. I'm not telling you which shul to do, but I will stick in the commercial. We're having a second day minyan, as we always do. So if you're in that area, come. Right? I'm not the one to be saying this. I shouldn't be talking about this, but I'm here, so I'm going to be talking about that. Maybe we're talking to women, so I'm going to bring this up. Maybe think about engaging in the midst of family purity, family of mikveh, and with people a little bit older. It might be something you only need to do once, and it's an amazing, amazing mitzvah. If you want to engage in it, it's a beautiful, powerful, holy, amazing mitzvah. You don't hear me talk about it very often because it's not really my place. But it's an amazing mitzvah, and again, some of you, it'll only be once. And I'll put you in touch with someone who could do it. But take something upon yourself. Of course, light Shabbos candles on time. It's now hard in the winter. Or maybe embrace it and ask of Shabbat, or any mitzvah. But now's the time to actually do something tangible, something uniquely Jewish, both in learning and in mitzvah observance. I'm not talking about becoming a Rebbitzin overnight. I'm talking about one mitzvah. Take upon yourself a mitzvah, because that ripple effect could be amazing. The power could be amazing. They need to see that we are proud. They need to see we're not giving up, but we're not giving up our connection with God, and we're not giving up hope, and we just are forging on, and we're becoming stronger. Stronger as people, stronger in our belief, stronger in our prayer, stronger in our hope, but stronger in our Jewishness. And Jewishness means Jewish engagement, practical engagement in learning and practice. Really do it. Really do it. Shouldn't just be a drasha. Right? Just shouldn't be only that when you finish it and you go, it was a good shir, it wasn't a good shir, it could have been better, it could have been worse. You can do all that also, but do something. Take upon yourself something. You're not sure what? Discuss with me. Really, I think this is the call of the hour. This is the urgency of the hour. Not to give up hope. Those things are very important. We hang on to help. We believe, and emunah is so important. Prayer is so important. But really now, what it's calling for is we've got to immerse ourselves in Jewish practice. And let me finish with one thing, and that is going back to the wrestle between Yaakov and the angel. So I didn't tell you the whole story. So they wrestled the entire night. And the angel was not able to destroy Yaakov, but he was able to injure him towards the end of the night. And then after that it says, Vayizrach lo hashemesh. The sun shone. The sun began to shine. And God brought out the sun, a very strong sun, it says. And because Yaakov was hurt on his thigh. And the light of the sun healed Yaakov. That after limping for a little bit, he came to his destination. He came to Shechem, the place of Shechem. That's where he was going at the time. And he came there healed and complete. So this is what we need to understand, and we need to really, really believe. And that is, we've had a long night. Since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash so many years ago on Tisha B'Av, we've had a very, very long night. And we've been injured. And perhaps the injury towards the end of the night, the Holocaust and what's going on now, has been perhaps some of the worst injuries ever. And we are limping. Yes, we are limping. We'll never be destroyed, but we are limping. And we're going to fix that because we're going to fight back, as we said before. But we also have to know that it's not long. We're now towards the end of the night. Very, very soon the sun will come out. We can see signs of it already, but it's going to come out and shine brightly. And the light and the clarity and the Jewish pride will pay off. And the Jewishness will be recognized in the entire world. And yes, we believe it's one of the 13 principles of faith that we sing about on Friday night after Shul when we sing Yigdal. Mashiach will come. And there will be a third temple. And then the light will heal us. And we'll be completely healed and completely at peace. And that will be the final part of the journey. We just have to make the choice now to be part of that journey. And we're going to be part of it. And very soon, please God, we will see that light. And we'll see that light and we'll be completely healed. Have a wonderful week. Amen. We will start the next series next week. Come and learn.